All right, well, thank you very much everyone for attending today. My name is Arwa Garbi, and I'm a PhD student in computational science and engineering and aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech. I am also a lead student volunteer with SC20. So again, thank you very much for attending. Thank you for our panelists. And this is one of the last series of panels we have been organizing for the last couple of weeks. This should be available to you, as Ashley was mentioning. She's recording it and should be available. And if you have a question about that, please feel free to text, message me or Ashley, and we should be able to respond to that. So just a couple of bookkeeping things. Please mute yourselves throughout the panel. You can keep your video on if you want, so the panels can see your reactions and we can make it feel more like an interactive panel, but that's totally up to you. And on the slides, as you can see here, I posted, there is a link so that you can ask questions and we can go over your questions at the end if there is still time. So with that in mind, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Dr. Peter Hague. He's a licensed psychologist at the Georgia Counseling Center, and he's currently the coordinator of the peer coaching program and mindfulness services. He was also he was also in charge of the grad program at Georgia Tech, and I had the pleasure of taking a class with him for mindfulness, choral mindfulness, and it was pretty useful. So thank you for joining us. We also have Naya Butler-Craig. She's a fellow PhD student here in Georgia Tech in the aerospace engineering department as well. She's a GEM fellow and a NASA Space Technology Graduate Research Fellow. And she was one of the panelists of a conference that we organized in Georgia Tech for the same subject and provided really, really good advice. She's an awesome person to be a friend with. And finally, Indigo, my friend from SC, Indigo Lanilo Lewis Jones, who is a business development and compliance engineer at Cleanergy, Celenergy EV. She was a student lead and a student volunteer with supercomputing for a couple of years, for many years. So it's really, really good to see you back here with us. So thank you again for making the time to attend today and for accepting the invitation to this panel. So I have, actually have noted some questions here in the slides to guide our conversation, but we can go off script if needed. So I would like to start with Peter. And the question is, are current students actually exposed to more stress than students in previous years? We hear that a lot, and I'm wondering if that's something that you could confirm as well.
I think it's a complicated question, but overall, yes. And I understand we have a lot to get through. I could go on about this for quite a while. So first of all, the data shows that yes, things like stress and anxiety are pretty linked in a lot of ways, but they are different. They are different kind of bodily responses, but they are up, absolutely up up for college students. Overall, mental health issues in general are a lot higher and are kind of on the rise over the past decade and a half or so. Depression actually used to be the most common thing treated in college counseling centers. Now anxiety is really at the forefront. So certainly the experience of stress is more intense than it ever has been. And are they exposed to more stress? That's a trickier question because we're talking about stressors, which is what causes the stress response, right? And that's where the question becomes a little bit more multifaceted. I think we can't ignore ironically, the influence of technology on stress and of social media and things like that. I think technology and certainly things like social media and having a phone in our hand gives people a crutch for their anxiety, a crutch for their stress, and can prevent the younger generation from actually building some of those stress and anxiety management skills for when that stress comes. Technology also kind of inherently creates a world that's faster pace and that is filled with more stress and more stressors. If you think about it, the fact that you can get 50 emails in a day and there's an expectation that you have to answer them, that's different from how it was before email was a thing and it was all done over phone or whatever it might be. And so it's kind of tough to break it down, but overall, yes, I would say the students in college now are definitely more stressed out than they've ever been.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with you regarding the technology point of view. So Naya, follow up on that. Is that also your experience as a PhD student? I know we talked a little bit about that in the previous panel, but would you like to share your experience with us?
Sure, absolutely. I can definitely see how that data is kind of coming to life in my own kind of personal journey through just all these different changes. I think we're all dealing with like unprecedented territory. Mm-hmm. And we're not sure that all of our responsibilities will be as flexible as the current times are right now. And so I think dealing with that is producing a lot of anxiety because we don't know how rigid our professors are going to be with regard to grading in such a new time. We don't know how our jobs are going to be flexible and if we'll be making the same amount of money in the next few months or so. And so I think there are just a lot of variables right now and not a lot of stability. And I've definitely, speaking for myself, I've been experiencing a level of anxiety because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Indigo, you've been a master's student and now you move to the workforce. Was that a shift from the levels of stress or it's still the same?
I think it's kind of different types of stress.
Okay.
I found in university was very competitive. I think especially competitive university, that's definitely one of the stresses. But then I think coming from an educational place into the workplace where I was a software engineer for the past year at Airbus, it was a completely different type of stress where you have to keep up with people or you feel the need to keep up with people. I definitely think that's a massive factor in how younger people are feeling the stress pile on top of them. They're not sure if they will be able to get a job in the future as well. And that's also it makes a massive impact.
Absolutely. And I think you brought some very interesting point with regards to the circumstances, as you said, Naya, these unprecedented circumstances. So a question that might arise, what are some of the things that I need to be looking for in myself that might indicate that I have a mental health problem? Like right now, most of people will say I'm stressed and I'm anxious and all of that. But what are the signs? And is there a difference between, like, let's say, pandemic-induced stress, and then if you have an actual problem that you need to see a psychologist for? Indigo, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was going to say, when you look in the mirror and you don't recognize the person as the same person 10 years ago, I think one of the major things is not being able to attribute your anxiety, stress, or depression with one factor. I think a lot of people suffer with, they have a great life and they feel sad and they have no reason to feel sad. And that's definitely a really good example of how you can recognize there's a problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Naya, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I definitely want to default to the mental health professional that we have access to here today, but I think in my own way, I definitely agree with Indigo. Just kind of, I mean, there's a lot of things I'm struggling with that I wasn't struggling with as much in the spring semester. So I can tell, what is kind of pandemic induced, namely like procrastination, where like, I know I can do something and I'm avoiding it so much because I'm almost afraid of doing it. I just don't want to exert that amount of mental energy. I find myself really exhausted for no reason. I don't want to talk to anybody. I mean, there are so many signs, and I think it's going to vary for different people and obviously different circumstances. But I think in general, if you have the thought that you should go seek help, it never hurts to talk to a mental health professional. And if they tell you, you know, maybe you're dealing with this instead of what you thought, you know, you want to avoid self-diagnosing, but it never hurts to get a second opinion, because your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Like if I start coughing, I'm not just going to sit with the cough and say, oh, it's just a minor, you know, cold. I'm going to go see a doctor.
Yeah, I see Peter clapping, because I think that is a very good analogy. Like as soon as there is something wrong with our bodies physically, we go to a doctor, but mentally we're like, no, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm not working hard enough. So Peter, what should we look for? What are the indicators that we are having struggles, even though, you know, everybody is saying that we're anxious, we're procrastinating, and so forth?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to address the clapping. I mean, Naya, I loved that point. Why is it okay to go to the doctor for a cold or a cough or the flu, but it's not okay if you've been super sad and low or super duper anxious? Like come on, like it's fine. That's our culture and our society influencing us in ways that aren't helpful, right? So I appreciated you saying that. So when I think about when's it time to go seek help, first of all, I don't think it needs to be like, I mean, okay, putting aside the fact that seeking, especially if you're not on a college campus where it's by and large, you know, included in your fees, it is a financial thing that you have to consider. It can be difficult to make that work, but setting that aside for just the purposes of this discussion, it shouldn't be that big a deal to go see a therapist. That's my thing. I know it's also tough to be vulnerable with other people, but I'm talking about the stigma around it is what I'm getting at, okay? But if I'm thinking of when do we start thinking about, okay, this is, my problems are becoming clinical to the point that I need to go seek help with a professional. So I'm thinking about functioning, you know, am I starting to not function in certain important areas, socially, academically, occupationally, whatever it might be? Is my functioning decreasing and being impacted by my emotional struggles or depression or stress? You know, we have to remember that stress and anxiety and depression, these are words, these are terms and labels that really just reflect kind of slightly more kind of a normal human spectrum, a normal spectrum of human experience is just kind of on an extreme end, right? And everybody in this, you know, everybody listening to this right now has felt depressed, has felt anxious, has felt stress. You know, anxiety is a protective emotional experience. It's something that it's a very normal human experience. And yes, it's uncomfortable and distressing as well. But I think it's important to look at, is it impacting me on a daily basis and taking away from my ability to engage in the things that are important to me, right? You know, I think a lot of times people who are really struggling and don't really capture it in this way, but their struggles with stress or anxiety or whatever it might be, take them away from their values, take them away from what makes up a vital, meaningful life for them. And that's often when things start to feel, when you start looking in the mirror and thinking, wait, who is this person, right? Something feels missing. And a lot of times it's a disconnect from values. And that's because, you know, the stress or the anxiety is kind of getting in the way. So that's typically how I think about it, is in terms of functioning and in terms of connection with what's important or disconnection from those things, as kind of an extension of the stress and anxiety. Or again, I keep saying those words, an extension of the psychological or emotional problems.
Absolutely, and that totally makes sense. So I want to go back to Indigo actually and ask you about your experience with supercomputing in particular. So you have been with supercomputing for how many years?
Oh, I think I was student volunteer for 2 years, lead for 1 year.
Excellent. So you can share your experience with us, and I would love to hear Naya's opinion about this after that, and Peter as well. So what I want to ask is, and let me change to the slide, is that the conference provides excellent learning and networking opportunities, but it's it might seem as an overwhelming environment. I mean, to me personally, it seems that's overwhelming, and like I'm here with, well, unfortunately not this year, but with all these awesome researchers, with these genius people from all over the world. What am I doing in this place? So was this your experience when you were a student volunteer, and what would be good advice to give?
So I think what you may be describing is like imposter syndrome, and that's a massive problem, especially in the engineering sector. But me as kind of an introverted person, I'm not too extroverted. It was a bit of an anxious experience knowing I'd be around people that I wouldn't be able to make conversation with or be comfortable around.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, from going to SC, it has encouraged my ability to speak to people and network and learn and see what all these people are about, because there's people from all over the world with different experiences. And I think that it is a really important experience, especially for engineering students.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Naya, I think the AIAA conferences are not less overwhelming, again, at least to me, than SC. So how was your experience with that?
Absolutely. I definitely did enjoy AIAA conferences. Just like Indigo said, you're getting to meet so many different people and hear so many different perspectives within your research, with other research, which is really fun and exciting. Definitely dealt with imposter syndrome. I think my first AIAA conference, I was an undergrad, and I was actually presenting. And I went to somebody's just talk, and I was like, my God, my presentation is nowhere near on the caliber
Mm-hmm.
of this person's presentation, and yet I'm here presenting. And so I definitely got super nervous, and that's definitely been my experience. But I think I was lucky enough to go with a student group, and so I was with a lot of other people in my kind of cohort or around my academic level, and so that made it a lot better.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you two brought imposter syndrome, because the one funny thing about imposter syndrome is that it's always, well, that person have imposter syndrome, but not me. I'm actually like the one not doing the good work. So Peter, what should we do like in an environment like technical conferences to kind of like build our self-confidence and convince ourselves that we actually belong, rather than beating ourselves up?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, imposter syndrome is so prevalent. I mean, I don't know if maybe I've met a few people that truly deny that they've ever actually experienced it. And if you think you're the only one that, you know, everybody else has imposter syndrome, but I actually can't do this, I mean, it means you have imposter syndrome. Like it's that, there it is. So I think of imposter syndrome, maybe a little bit, I think of it as in terms of like a story within me getting activated. Okay. It's this story about me, and it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody's imposter story is a little bit different. It's based on our histories, and it's also based on stuff that's actually happened. So when I say story, that doesn't mean fiction necessarily. Okay? We have to get away from story meaning something fictional and that there's zero truth in it. But a story, when we're living according to a story in a certain situation, that story may or may not be helpful to us in that moment, right? And so if you walk into a big intimidating conference, the piece of that story that says that, you know, hey, there's a lot of really good researchers here and I'm still at the bottom of the totem pole. I mean, maybe part of that maybe part of a piece of that is actually a little bit true, but we have to recognize that a lot of it's going to be exaggerated, and asking ourselves the question, what is it that this story is trying to get me to do right now, which is often to hide away and not do the thing that's important to me, not do the important task at hand. And then flip that in your head and say, okay, but I need to charge into the storm because that's my story talking. And I know that despite what that little chatterbox is saying, this is important and I need to engage with it, even if it causes me a little bit of stress and anxiety in the moment, right? So really breaking it down, recognizing when something's getting activated, that, and then asking yourself, not is that true or false? Because that's actually less important than, is that story helping me right now or is it not? usually it's not going to. It's trying to protect you, it's trying to protect you from failure or rejection or whatever it might be. But oftentimes it's really not helping you. It's just going to pull you away from opportunities that are important and whatnot. So I'm not sure if that was helpful, but
absolutely. No, that was super helpful. And I like to shift gears a little bit right now. Well, we're still in the same topic. We're talking about mental health in professional environments or in technical conferences. And I know from my personal experiences, not necessarily all the technical conferences that I've been to had this conversation where we break the stigma, as you said earlier. So do you think it's important to have these conversations in this environment? I know it's like a couple of packed days of just presentations and all of that, but do you think we need to have it anyways, provide or have some like time slot for it? And why is that? And we can start with whoever wants to take it first.
Can I just jump in really fast? It's definitely answering the question, but I also really like
Sure.
Dr. Hague said about, kind of how is this story helping me? And like, even if there is a bit of truth to that, because I think, whenever I tell, like, my mom's my crutch. So if I was at a conference and I was feeling very inadequate, I would call her and be like, Mom, I feel like a loser or whatever. And she's like, no, you belong there. You are just like everybody else. But that may not be the truth. Like, it's what I may want to hear, but it's okay. Like I was the undergrad. These are people with PhDs and much further along in their research journeys and careers. And that's okay. And that's the truth.
Yeah.
But instead of allowing those thoughts to kind of, like Dr. Hague said, have me retract and not ask questions and engage and network, you can almost push those to kind of say, okay, well, that means there's a lot that I can learn from these people, and I can continue to develop and evolve as a researcher and a scientist because I have access to all these people now. And so I've actually used that strategy like once or twice. I do forget because, imposter syndrome is very convincing, and it'll want you to kind of shy away from those opportunities. But I think really acknowledging, and also I like to answer your question, I think it absolutely has a place in technical conferences, especially for younger attendees, for people, who want to ask questions, who are really curious about science, but are nervous in these talks where they could get a lot of information, a lot of resources. Just kind of to push them to say, it's okay that you're at this level. We're glad that you're here, and there's plenty for you to learn. So yes, to answer.
Yeah, and talking about AIAA and moms, I remember my first one, I had lunch with an astronaut, and like after the lunch was done, I picked up the phone, Mom, I just had lunch with an astronaut. She has been in space. I was so overwhelmed. It's fantastic. But yeah, going back to conversations around mental health in conferences. So any other thoughts to share?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have a terrific perspective on this because I haven't been to a whole lot of supercomputing conferences. This would be the first.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about computing, but if I were to make a gentle assumption here that in supercomputing, I'm imagining we're not talking a whole lot about emotions very much, and that's important. That's something, in my field, we talk about emotions all the time. And I get, obviously I'm in the mental health field, but even in other fields, I don't know, I just feel like the work lends itself to that, a little that more personable, person-centered model structure or whatever it might be. But, when we're talking about computers and super linear thinking and a super linear approach to problems, emotions get lost there because emotions aren't linear. Emotions can't be added up, A plus B equals C. It just doesn't work like that. And so creating space where people can express and hear from other people and share and connect, it's going to be important no matter what the field, and also in a field like computing, it's probably even more important to very deliberately create that space. So.
Absolutely. And I have a question later on about like what would be the ideas to bring this conversation more into technical conferences, but I appreciate you mentioning create and space. I'd like to move to the next question, and it's something that I think most students would relate to. And I would like to start with getting Naya's opinion, because I know you are pretty vocal about mental health in your lab, on campus, on social media, and you inspired a lot of students about how to, conduct such conversations. But I wonder about like the beginning. Was it difficult to have this conversation when you started? And how can students approach them moving forward?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think to answer your first question, it was a bit difficult, just not because of my advisor. It was just, I mean, I was new to grad school. I was new to a new school, to Georgia Tech. Everything was new. I didn't really know what to ask. I didn't know, what to do essentially. But what I found really useful was just first establishing like a real working relationship with my advisor. And I did that through just like a regular meeting with him. So not just a meeting when something was going wrong, or not just a meeting when I needed a technical, advice or guidance. It was a regular bi-weekly or monthly meeting where we just sat down and we just took a scope of like research, school, and anything else I had going on. And so obviously sometimes there's nothing going on with research in school. And so we'd have an opportunity to just kind of talk. He'll ask me how I'm actually doing. And then that would essentially open a door for me to say, well, this kind of sucks right now, or I'm dealing with this, and et cetera, et cetera. I know not everybody has an advisor that can make themselves that available, but I think that, the first step is kind of first establishing that working relationship, because one, that clears the way for later on when you're in your dissertation phase and you need something and you're too scared to reach out. It really just breaks down a lot of those walls. And so hopefully that you can eventually open that door to discuss your mental health and how things are affecting you. And I think, what was the second part of your question?
How could students approach these conversations?
Okay, perfect. So I think that answers it. And I should say, like, for advisors who you may not have those opportunities with, I would definitely suggest finding somebody else to speak to about it. I don't think that you should retract completely from expressing yourself to somebody who can give you advice and who's also in a position, like an advisor or has experience in your field, or, just someone you can talk to about it, that has experience with what you're doing. Because yes, mental health counselors are definitely one component, but the other component is getting advice from people who have been through certain experiences that you're trying to learn about. And so I'm really big on diversifying mentors and having mentors in every area.
Absolutely.
So I would definitely encourage that if you can't do so with your advisor.
Absolutely. And that is a great insight. And Indigo, I know that it's probably also kind of the same thing in the workplace. I mean, I did work for a year and it wasn't easy for me to talk to my boss about when I'm not feeling good or any of that. So is it the same? And how do you navigate that? How do you start that conversation?
I think from when I started as a software engineer a year ago now, I suffer with a lifelong chronic condition, inflammatory bowel disease. And I had to not only say about the medications I'm on for depression, anxiety, and everything like that, but explain the situation I'm in my physical health. And I think those are exactly the same things. I think when you start a job, especially coming from education, you start a job, the first thing you should think about is anything affecting me? And if it is, I need to tell somebody about it. They can't help you and give you the time off unless they know. And my dad's head of engineering at a foods company. And he told me managers can be very linear, very logical. They'll take on board what problems you're having, but you should be upfront about them. So he said to me, the first thing you need to tell them is these problems, lay them out. Once you've got the job, obviously, don't do it before, but and they can help you as much as they can. It's all about it's really hard to initially tell people, but just know that they probably know exactly how you're feeling and they'd want the same respect.
Absolutely. And I know, Peter, this is like part of many conversations we had about, again, breaking the stigma between advisors and advisee and professor and students. Like what would be, and let me put it in like less formal words, how could I get the courage to do that? If that is the right thing that I need actually to start this conversation.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, you know, and I don't have an answer as to how to summon courage, how to get the courage. I think it comes down to acknowledging that inherently for a lot of us, it's going to be nerve-wracking and anxiety provoking to go to a professor and advisor, someone who holds power over you. You know,
Yeah.
they're in a position of power over the students. They have something that you really want and they can give it to you or not, essentially, right? And so that's a position of power. And so I think holding that in mind here, you know, and before, as you're going into that, and you know, kind of holding whatever anxiety is coming up pretty lightly as well, but also remembering how important it is that you express this to your advisor, right? And at least have that conversation at some point. Now, the other thing, and I think Naya mentioned this, and I wanted to build on that, is that not every advisor is going to be open to these conversations. We need to acknowledge that there are some crappy advisors out there who don't give a hoot about your mental health, and that sucks. And so, this may be, you know, there may be situations where you need to get your emotional support within the department from someone else, from a different advisor. You may need to switch advisors or research labs if that's possible. I'm not going to pretend that there aren't barriers and boundaries to that. And also bear in mind that you never quite know, and that's the other thing, you never quite know how an advisor is going to react. You might think they're going to be not receptive, but if you go into it very, I think if you go into it with this sense of responsibility and accountability and not making demands of the advisor, but voicing that you're struggling, voicing that you could use X, Y, and Z type of support, I think that's probably the best way to go about doing it. And so, and you might be surprised. I've had students that have been very surprised by how that conversation has gone with their advisor or their professor, and it's led to more understanding. And it's one of those things where if hopefully it works out, and if it doesn't, well, at least you know this isn't a professor that you can really count on for this. Now we get to problem solve. Now we get to figure out what's a way around this. How else can we do this? But you can't start that problem solving until you have that information, essentially. And obviously that takes an potentially uncomfortable conversation. But I think also holding in mind too that vulnerability is tricky, and it's okay to feel nervous going into a conversation like that. And you may learn through that first conversation, this is not someone, like I said, that you want to be vulnerable with, because without safety, vulnerability is only going to hurt, right? It's only going to lead to bad things. And a lot of professors and advisors will show themselves to be safe people to talk to. And then there's going to be a few that aren't. And I think being aware of both of those things is really important, so that you're sort of seeing the relationship through a clearer lens as you're kind of going into it.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, and you mentioned that switching advisors is an option, because that is something that I had to learn myself the hard way. Started masters in an area that I didn't like, I didn't know much about. And for a year and a half, I was just like working day and night, trying saying that always it's me, the problem, because I'm not, working hard enough and all of that. And then I went and talked to my advisor, and he was super understanding. I was like, listen, it's nothing against you. You're a great professor, but that is not what is compatible with my research objectives. And he was totally understanding. And I was so surprised, and also like a little bit mad at myself for waiting a year and a half to gather the courage and face him with that. But it's always easy to forget what options we have. And how like having a conversation can solve so many problems that we're facing. And I think one thing that I wanted to comment on, if there is one positive takeaway from this pandemic, is the fact that I think people started to normalize asking, how are you doing? And asking about mental health more than before. And I noticed that particularly in the aerospace department, Naya, we receive emails from the head of department, from the director of graduate studies, and they literally tell us, we are here if you need to talk about anything, even if you want to talk about your cats. And I'm like, wow, I wish you said that before, but I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the opportunity. But at the same time, let's keep it going. Hopefully this will stay as a trend, not as a trend, but will stay as a good habit that we keep in our environments. So I want to go back to SC in particular, and I know that Peter a couple of minutes ago mentioned creating spaces and conferences. So I'd actually like to start with Indigo. If you can tell us, in your opinion, what is that SC offers that helps students in your opinion? And then I would like to hear from Peter and Naya about what could we do better? How can we improve this?
So I think one of the things SC offers, and I don't think they realize they offer, is just people with open ears. I think that's so important. As you know, when I was lead student volunteer at SC18, and I got rushed off to hospital in the middle of the conference.
Yeah.
The main thing that kept me going through that was the constant communication between the committee and me, and they were like, how are you doing? What do you need? That is really, really important. And I don't think SC even knows they have such amazing people who are at the crux of kind of the support that these students need at SC.
Absolutely. And that's a very good point. I think SC offers one of, in my experience, the best student programs in any technical conference I attended. And I know this is not the case for all technical conferences, but what could we do better to improve this, to destigmatize, to start the conversation? So Naya, if you have any suggestions for us.
Sure. I mean, I gotta say, I'm really impressed that even a panel like this has made it onto the schedule for a technical conference. I don't think I've ever attended a mental health panel during a technical conference, except for like a NSBE conference, which was National Society of Black Engineers, where, you know, or like a SWE, Women Engineers, SHEP, which is Hispanic Professional Engineers. And so it's really interesting to see a strictly technical conference kind of hold space, just like, you know, Dr. Hague said, for this kind of conversation. And I think this is a great step, and honestly, one of the biggest steps to take. I think if I could add anything, I would just say maybe just like student liaisons. And I use that term kind of loosely because I don't want to make it seem as if like students are the only ones that deal with mental health issues. I think there are a lot of, you know, academic professionals and professionals who need it a lot, and it would help everybody else if they sought the professional help that they needed too, right? As they're likely the leaders in the industry. But I like the term student liaison because I would love if there was a central resource of, you know, of staff people on the conference committee who just checked in with students and made sure that they had what they needed. And not in any sort of program, but just in general, like they are the student liaisons. And so what I think would be really cool is that if our students are dealing with like research areas and advisors they're not compatible with at their university, they shouldn't be limited to just their university if they have a whole conference full of people they can network with. So who knows the connections that could be made, and that could be the burdens that could be lifted off students' backs, just having the opportunity to just to talk to different people, be connected to different people. It also strips away the fear and kind of anxiety with just approaching certain people you want to talk to at a conference if you had a liaison that could help make that connection. So it's not necessarily mental health motivated, but I think that it would just really help to have that extra help and those extra resources at every technical conference.
I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. And going back to you, Peter, you mentioned creating spaces. Is there anything that you would like to add in that? And I think I would like to particularly ask, I mean, I know creating spaces starts conversations, but in the line of what Naya was mentioning, something that is actually helpful for students, a support system for students in technical conferences.
Well, I'm kind of struggling because I don't know much about these conferences, so it's a little tough for me to talk about what you can do more or less of, because I don't really know what you do outside of this space and what Naya and Indigo have already shared. I think creating spaces like this is awesome, and I think the idea of student liaisons is awesome, or programming specifically for students, targeting not helping build their skills, but helping them with the transition from student to professional. Absolutely. And what that's like, you know, and because that's about the person, not about the skills, right? Which are obviously important, but that's part of the journey. It's not the whole journey, and that's where the imposter syndrome stuff kind of comes up. You know, opportunities for maybe more seasoned and experienced computing people, I don't know what the terms are, to share their experiences entering the field, the things that sharing their failures. Let's talk about all the ways that I've failed and normalize failing. You know, we get way too wrapped up in success and all these stories of success, and only talking about failure when it inevitably led to success. Like, come on, stop. We got to talk about failure and how that's part of the journey, and the journey being to whatever, you know. I think really getting, you know, breaking free that sort of narrative about we need to it all needs to be geared towards success and efficiency and productivity. How about just looking at us, you know, you, the people in this field, and what the experience is like. And so yeah, programming sort of targeting those things, which aren't necessarily going to lead to new technical skills, but it's going to lead to happier, more effective people in the field for sure. Yeah, that was kind of my Peter's ramblings about what could maybe be different.
That was all great advice. Thank you very much for sharing that.
All right, and if I could just kind of build on that really fast.
Please.
This is just something super specific that came up as Dr. Hague was talking, but I think, you know, at technical conference, people are very like, you know, logical thinking, linearly thinking, and maybe a good idea is to have like a statistician or somebody who has looked at the data and the correlation between happy employees and effective companies, because a lot of people just need that data. They need hard data to prove, you know, any sort of point. And so maybe even having more programming, you know, if you don't want to dive straight into feelings and emotions, which could be very uncomfortable for certain people, maybe just talking about how more effective you can be if you start tackling, you know, your mental health and just, you know, kind of sewing into your employees, your students, et cetera, and what the positive outcomes could come from that.
And
absolutely.
On top of that, thank you, Naya, because that reminds me, I mean, I think bringing in, so I'm a clinical psychologist, bringing in, there's something called industrial organizational psychology. It's called IO psychology. It's a different field than I practice, but they specialize in essentially, you know, helping organizations from a psychological standpoint, you know, run as smoothly as possible, increasing job performance, job satisfaction. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I mean, it'd be cool to have an IO psychologist on a panel like this, or even do a presentation about, and again, making that connection between the mental health of workers, and not just the overall mental health, like lack of mental disorders or something like that, but like, you know, the importance of that personal aspect as far as having an effective team, right? And I think that'll speak to that sort of linear mind, right? That engineers and STEM folks are really, really strong in. So yeah, that just kind of reminded me that would be a neat resource too, because I can talk about it kind of theoretically, but I don't really have data to back it up. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that is I didn't know about that thing, so thank you for sharing that. And I would like to go back to Indigo for this question, since you have experience with SC, you actually attended. So what could we do in addition to what Peter and Naya have already mentioned?
I think it's really difficult to put together like what you think should be done that helps, I think, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I suggested back in 2018 was a corner of a room that was kind of a quiet area, because what I noticed is you could go into the shared area with all the students, but if you're quite an introverted person and you're already feeling anxious, you don't want to go into a big room full of people. And I noticed that at my job with Airbus as well. There was, we had an occupational therapist on site, and there was also like a small room where you could have a cup of tea, you could watch some TV, listen to some radio away from everybody else. And I think we really need to normalize time alone, time away from our phones, time away from the stresses, especially during a conference. It can just get in your head too much.
Absolutely. I like how we are back to something that was at the beginning, which is technology and the effect of phones. And I've been listening to this interesting podcast about deep work and how it's important to keep all of the, like, as much as they're helping us with daily lives, sometimes you just need to turn everything off and be in the moment and be in the mental state that allows you to be creative, because that is something that what the thought that was said is that it's unlike what people think, that creativity is something that you're born with. You actually can cultivate that. So that's a very good point. So I guess we're shifting gear a little bit. Ashley, do you want to?
Oh, I was just going to actually say we have several questions from the attendees, and so it sounds like you're about to go there anyway.
Yeah. So I have like the last questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So the topic of this panel, self-care. How do you define that? And if it's possible, I'd like to start with, perspectives from Naya and Indigo, and then end it with Peter as an expert in this area. So whoever wants to go first.
I'll go ahead and start. I think that's a really good question because one, I would say self-care is I think it varies so much. And me personally, I was the type to try and get self-care ideas, and I would get self-care defined by like social media influencers and people who weren't really experts. And while there's nothing wrong with being like influenced by somebody or getting a technique from somebody, I used to think that their version of self-care was what I had to do to take care of myself. And it never worked because it was always like a spa day that I never had time for, or it was always like drinking wine. And I was like, it's Monday night, I've got a project due. And so it was really important for me to kind of sit down with my own therapist and kind of talk about what self-care I needed. And so that's the first thing I would encourage is, try not to get it defined by just any old body, even though you can get influence. But your definitions and getting like your own kind of tailored self-care package should come from, somebody who knows you well as a professional, so a mental health professional. And so for me, that looks like a bunch of different things. And sometimes it doesn't look like the same thing every time. Sometimes I feel like playing guitar, sometimes I feel like painting, and sometimes I just want to sit down and watch a movie. And I think all those things, I have to make room for all of it. I can't always force myself to paint because then it's not self-care anymore.
Absolutely.
If it becomes a chore. And so I think it's a very fluid thing. Mindfulness is another thing that I had to get a better understanding of because I thought it was like clearing your mind. And I thought that was impossible for me. I thought there was something wrong with me because I can't clear my mind. How do you do that? And then I quickly learned when I sat down with my therapist that it's not clearing your mind and trying to stop thoughts from coming in. It's just observing thoughts and allowing them to do what they do, but not sit and dwell on them. And so when I learned that really just revolutionized how I spend time with myself. So I would encourage those things. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Indigo, do you want to share something?
Yeah, I think You're absolutely right, Naya. Absolutely right. I was definitely influenced by people on Instagram saying top 10 things to do for self-care, and I do one like every day, and then I try and do each one like every hour, and it just doesn't work. Didn't work. For me, it was a combination of medication and just learning what I liked and what kept me mellow and what stopped my thoughts from racing. So personally, for me, it's weightlifting. Like I know a lot of people love going to the gym because you exert all that energy that would otherwise be like piled up in your brain.
Mhm.
Other things for me, like really, really small things like straightening my hair, because especially now that we're living in lockdown, I'll wash my hair, do it, and then do nothing else to it. No makeup, nothing. But if I sit here and put a bit of makeup on, if I'm definitely feeling a bit down about myself, it really helps. And people have got to find what is right for them, exactly like Naya said. It's not a one size fits all thing, and try not to see all the Instagram influencers trying to tell you to book a $200 spa day when not everyone can do that.
Absolutely. That is a very good point. Peter, I saw that you had a friend in there.
Yes, this is my dog Marty, and he's getting a little rambunctious because he wants dinner, but it's not dinner time. I explain this to him. Yeah, so yeah, self-care, I agree with everything that's been said. I think of self-care as really intentional efforts to nourish and care for your kind of physical and mental well-being. And the really key word there is intentional, right?
Mm.
We we as humans fall into patterns and routines that are comfortable, and make us feel a little bit better in the short term, but just like very, very momentary. But a lot of times we get disconnected with the things that we actually find enjoyable or actually find really meaningful, because it's easier to just scroll through Instagram for a minute here and disconnect with the homework that's in front of me. And what that often becomes is we live very mindlessly. And I love that Naya brought up mindfulness, and that's a big area of mine. So she kind of honestly covered it, and I don't even have anything else to add to that. So well done. I think doing things that are more present, that bring you into the present, and doing things mindfully, and things that are connected to what you actually enjoy and are actually important to you and meaningful to you, that's often going to be the best form of self-care. And that is different for everyone. That's why for me, like, okay, I'll be honest, like I go on social media. That's part of how I like take breaks during the day and from my work. And I also know that that's not good self-care for me. And actually I'm cutting it out soon. I'm actually going to end social media for a while for other reasons. But I know that I'm not being nourished by that. It's just a distraction, and distraction doesn't always mean self-care, right? For some people, social media might actually be your passion, might lie there, and great, do that. But I know for me, like that, I'm not going to lose much when I stop doing, in fact, social media. In fact, it's going to make me a more present person, and I'm kind of excited for that. And so I think it has to be intentional, because a lot of times we fall into these routines and patterns that aren't actually helping us so much, but we need to make an effort to do something. But yeah, I remember in the beginning of this pandemic, like every day I saw a new article about, make sure you're spending time with friends and do Zoom calls with people and this and that. And I remember thinking, like, I am so sick of Zoom calls with my friends and family. I am so zoomed out. This isn't self-care at all for me right now.
Yeah.
And it's driving me bananas. And one of the things I was encouraging people was like, read that stuff, fine, but make your decisions for yourself, which I think is what both of you just spoke to, especially you, Indigo. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on self-care. It's got to be for you, and it might take a little while for you to figure out what actually is good self-care for you. You might not find it on a BuzzFeed article.
Mm-hmm.
Like it might be something that, yeah, like Naya said, sitting down with a professional, or if you happen to be seeing a professional, or having a long conversation with a friend or someone who knows you well. Like let's take a look at the things I'm doing now, because clearly that's not working. and what are some things I can try differently. So.
Thank you very much. And I'd like that in your question, in all of your answers, you kind of touched on the next question, and something that is actually coming from the audience. It's with regards to work in isolation, like this scenario that we're all in, how to deal with working in isolation. So we have this question where they're saying, I'm working constantly from a 1-bedroom tiny apartment, and it makes me demotivated and detached from my regular productivity. So what advice do you have to practice self-care?
I'll start this one off because I am in a 1-bedroom apartment with my fiance. Luckily, he's a bricklayer apprentice, so he goes out in the day, but sometimes he's home. And I've been working from home now since I moved into my new role. And I find that it's really hard to not get inside your own head, especially when you're sat here with nobody else to talk to. You're surrounded by the same 4 walls. I've pretty much got all the blinds down because they're open to other people. But one thing I really find helpful, and this might not be helpful for anybody else, but I want to put it out there, is I put on lo-fi hip hop beats to study and chill to. They are so good just to have some background noise. And I love coffee club videos as well, where it sounds like you're in a coffee house. And I would really love to go to a coffee house right now and work, but you can't. And the best way I've found to simulate that in a 1-bedroom apartment is to put it on the TV. And also make sure to get out as much as you can. When you're working in an office, but you're working from home now, you're so unaccustomed to how much you're sitting, and you don't move as much to like the canteen. My kitchen's right opposite, right there. My bedroom's there, so I'm not walking around as much. Yeah. I've got one weight next to me. In between Zoom calls or Microsoft Team meetings, I pick up the weights, I do a little exercise. I think it's all about getting as much physical activity as you can in the middle of the day and making it feel like you're not the only person in the house.
Absolutely. Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I need to say is this actually, I have an appointment with a client at 3, so I do have to get going soon.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, and again, this isn't going to be one size fits all, like we were just saying, but I love the idea of trying to be active and sort of simulate what a more normal day might look like if there weren't a pandemic going on. Like, I don't know, I think if you can afford it, or if you can make a makeshift one, like having a standing desk is great for your back. If you're physically able enough to stand at a desk. It tends to, I mean, I think the research has shown it kind of tends to increase productivity and energy as well. Building in time away from the screen is, I mean, it's become cliche at this point, and yet I don't think people actually consciously do it all the time. Scientifically, it's not good to be staring at the same screen all day long. And so I think that's super duper relevant and important. And yeah, other things like, you know, one thing some people I certainly ran into is like having the fridge right there all day, you know, throw off kind of my eating patterns a little bit. And I think it can be helpful, as silly as this sounds, to actually, like, if you're someone that used to pack your lunch for the day the night before, pack your lunch for the day the night before, and that's your food for the day. And actually, you know, structure your eating or your rest or your breaks in a similar way, the same way you would have if you were in the office or on campus. I've told some of my students back when we were starting, you know, and everything was remote, like, if you have a class, you know, and if you had a class and you normally would have then walked 15 minutes to your next class, after your class, go outside and walk around for 15 minutes and come right back inside. But try and simulate to the best you can what things used to be like, well, within reason, of course. It's just an idea, and that's not going to work for everybody, but it can maybe help.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for sharing that. So I understand that you need to go now, but thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming here. And I will continue. I'll give Naya the opportunity to give her advice. So I hope you have a great day, Peter.
Yeah.
And it's always good to see you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I do apologize. I have to leave a little early.
It's okay.
But this was great. Thank you to the other presenters, and thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I guess.
Perfect. So to answer the question, I'm currently still figuring that out because I definitely get a little bit of stir crazy in here.
Mhm.
But one thing, and obviously exercise caution with this, you don't want to go broke. But I keep changing everything in my house. And so for one, like my desk actually used to be in that corner and I was just facing a wall, and I found that that does not work for me at all. So now I face my window. I've been adding some stuff kind of like within my line of sight at my desk that kind of just keep me excited. For example, very random, but I have like the Women of NASA Lego set just kind of sitting right there, and I look over to it a few times like, okay, there's the goal, keep being inspired. I have a view of artwork, I have a whiteboard, I just have a bunch of stuff right here, and that's just added a lot of one aesthetic because I appreciate a nice looking office space, and two, just it gives me an opportunity to just kind of get creative a little bit. It's exciting to move stuff around, to do a little bit of interior decoration. So that's what I would encourage within your financial limits, as I am I'm breaking out of them a bit, so I'm having to reel back.
Absolutely. And I think there is one important thing to add to that list. If it's possible, of course, cats or dogs, some furry friends. I have a cat and I love the snuggles. Yeah, that's my self-care routine, daily routine. So really appreciate it. So I guess this is the end. I know that we didn't get to ask all of the audience's questions, and I really apologize for that. I will stay online to chat with whoever is still have time right now, but I want to really thank our panelists. Indigo, I know it's nighttime. Naya, thank you very much. It's great to see you, and thank you for sharing your experiences.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. And as I said, at this point, I'll hang around for a little bit if you all want to chat. But this is the end of our last panel. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. I have about 5 more minutes, so I don't know if anything was tailored, but I can answer any question if needed.
That would be great. So, okay, so this question says, do you have some tips on how to become more familiar with conversations in this online format? Personally, I feel shyer in this online scenario to get in contact with someone I admire the work, and I really like some advice to improve this and better enjoy the conference.
That's a good question. I'm not sure if Indigo wanted to answer, but okay, yeah.
No, you go.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. In the online format, it definitely is a little nerve-wracking just to kind of reach out to somebody, ask them for a video conference. The way I'm just going to apply something I've used to reach out to everybody that I've been scared of. So like even my advisor, how I got to know him was reaching out with a specific ask. And so if I liked a certain research topic that they talked about during a talk, or if I liked a specific paper, I would say, hey, I read this part in your paper, I really enjoyed this, would you be able to sit down with me? And I think what that does for me is that leaves a lot of the gray or the empty space in the conversation out, because you have something you're going to talk about immediately. You're not just like, hey, can I look at you for 5 minutes? It's a bit awkward, especially in the online format. And then the second part is that if you do admire this person, if you want to work with them or you want to collaborate or, what have you, you also show some initiative and some extra interest, that you went the extra mile to kind of learn about what they're doing, to maybe even answer one of your own questions. Because I know there's been a few questions I've had about somebody's research that is in their research, and I'm sure it's pretty frustrating when you just had a talk and somebody like asks a question about it. That doesn't mean don't talk about it. Maybe you can just expand on those conversations more. And so I think those things just kind of could help that. And two, I don't think you always have to unmute your video. I don't think that should be a requirement for anybody. I don't know if people get offended. It may be a little weird talking to blank screens, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with kind of just explaining like, is it okay if I leave my video off? And maybe that could help too. So I think whatever works for you and what you're more comfortable with, people should be more understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Indigo, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say nothing's as nerve-wracking as doing a Zoom. I was on BBC News in the UK on
Whoa.
Zoom, and that was even worse than speaking to people I'd never spoke to before on Zoom. So just don't sign up to go on the news. But yeah, it's such a weird one, isn't it? Because we're not used to speaking to people over a screen, and it seems both like connected and disconnected at the same time. And I think honestly it kind of messes with people's heads. They don't know how to act. But yeah, I think what Naya said really touched home, and I think she made some really good points. And you don't, like she said, you don't always have to like unmute your mic. I don't think anybody would be offended by it, especially in this climate where you know, a lot of people are introverted. You know, they didn't want to video call in the first place, and they shouldn't have to do it now. So
yeah. And this actually reminds me, I had a conversation about a friend of mine yesterday, and he's actually extroverted, and he's having a lot of difficulty right now because he's been saying that he gets his energy from interacting with people. Now that everything is online, he feels down all the time. So I don't know how you could do this, especially if you're an extroverted person. It must be really challenging. So I guess we have one more question if you are willing to answer it. So considering the unstable worldwide scenario, what are the suggestions you have for students finishing their degree? In the past, people often move countries or institutions for opportunities, but how to handle this transition now where we are less sure of what will happen?
I can give a little bit of insight. It should be very clear, like a disclaimer, I'm speaking from a totally uninformed place as I'm still, finishing up my degree. But I would say, oh dang, I just lost my train of thought. Could you repeat that last part of the question again?
Yeah, how to handle the transition now where we are less sure of what will happen.
Oh, right. I would just say, I think it's all very scary right now. And I think it's augmented by like doom scrolling. And so I'm a doom scroller. I will be on Twitter and I have
Me
to
too.
like stop myself, just like getting freaked out, like just as I continue to read about things. And so just kind of having to remove yourself from the anxiety that's being augmented by what's going on in the media and what's being, constantly shoved down your throats, and it's all negative. Because I think you'll find, there are a lot of stories of people who are doing, I won't say just fine right now, but with respect to transitioning and finding jobs and et cetera, it's still possible. It's still happening. It's not as doomsday as some media can make it seem. And so I think that that's a huge part for me, and maybe advice everybody should take, just like having to remove yourself from social media, from the news, and just kind of focus on your next point in life and kind of put all your energy there. But with respect to kind of uncertainty, I would just say this is a time to really like use the heck out of LinkedIn and make sure you have a lot of networks and people that you know. And I think right now is a perfect time to be reaching out. I know like reaching out to people on LinkedIn was already kind of weird before, but now it's very normalized because this is the only way we can reach out to people. And so if you need to establish different connections, I would just do so now. And in any event that something happens with your current opportunities and you need to fall back, that you have people potentially who are in your corner, or you can just kind of ask and get some options from. I think this is a perfect time to kind of expand your networks virtually.
Absolutely. I saw Ashley who wanted. You're muted.
Thank you. I was just going to say to that question, I have seen a lot of people, a lot of companies are still doing hiring right now, but they're not requiring the employees to maybe relocate yet. You're able to, you know, maybe stay in your current location until the world opens back up. So I think my advice there would be, don't be afraid to pursue, you know, the positions or the grad school or whatever it is that you want to pursue, because you may find they will very easily work with you on the situation, and maybe you won't have to move across country until, you know, the point at which, you know, it's safe to do so. And so I know that in my particular lab, you know, we have hired several people who have asked if they could just stay where they're at. They don't want to move their families yet. You know, it's daunting to try to move in the middle of a pandemic. And so, you know, we've been very flexible and have allowed people to do that. So I just wanted to give that small bit of input.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess, like, I totally feel this at heart. I'm in this situation. I just try to convince myself to live every day, like live it day by day. And well, I'm not in a situation where I'm, you know, applying for jobs yet, so maybe I still have time. But at the same time, I'm approaching my proposal and my defense. I'm like, listen, baby steps. Let's get through that. Let's survive, because it is important to survive, to stay healthy, and then I'll worry about the other things when I have the bandwidth to worry about them, honestly. All right, so I guess that is pretty much all the questions that we have. I really want to thank you again. I don't know how to do a closes here, but that's what we do in SC. We do snaps. It's thank you for sharing. Thank you, Ashley, for organizing this and for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And for the other students, I guess I'll see you around in SC.